First of all, thanks, Verena, for agreeing to be with us. I know you've got your own big conference starting, so it's a great pleasure that you made the time to come here, because I know what it's like the day before conference.
Of course, always a pleasure.
No, thank you. And I think we talked about data sharing. Now we want to change tact a little bit and go back into securities markets. But maybe before we start with that, some speakers already alluded to DORA, the DORA implementation. 17th of January is still marked in my brain as an important date. How is the implementation of DORA going at the moment, Verena?
No, thanks, Nick, and thank you very much for having me here today. It's always a very enlightening conference on all the FinTech and innovation topics. So DORA, of course, is very much front of our mind at the moment, together with the other two ESAs. You already had Petra and José Manuel here today. So we are very much jointly working on now getting DORA up and running. We have, since 17th of January, it's there. It's clear that it is still a big demand on the market to actually now put everything in place to get it ready. Most of the policy measures are there. The last few are just coming through the pipeline to be finalized by the Commission. But we also are conscious that this means quite a lot of work, whether that is repapering, whether that is, looking at the contracts again, whether that is making sure that the register of information is ready and so on. And we certainly stand ready and to support that implementation process. And we will continue to provide, where we can, guidance and support to make it happen on the ground. We are, as ESAs, also starting to get ready for the actual oversight activity. We can only start that once we have designated the critical third-party providers. That relies in turn on actually getting the reports from the registers of information to determine which entity might be critical or not. And for that, we wanted to give the market also sufficient time and a bit of an exercise with the dry run to try to get all of that ready. We've now asked for that reporting to come in April, and then we will need to determine the critical service providers, and then we are currently planning to start the oversight activity towards the end of the year once that designation has taken place.
Thank you. You raised that a few, in relative terms, smaller pieces still coming through. One of them is the subcontracting one, which is linked to the repapering because it's part of the contractual arrangement between the financial institution and the technical service provider. There's been talk or requests for giving some supervisory lenience or guidance how companies should deal with this issue whereby the RTS have not yet been formally adopted. Is there any kind of indication, anything? What would you expect from, as a supervisory expectation, from a company until this RTS is in place?
So, first of all, I would hope that we can now get this in place and through the process pretty quickly. And I would also hope and assume that actually the changes are not that substantive compared to the draft of the RTS that we've provided. So I think on that basis, I would very much expect that people start preparing, looking at what they currently have, and actually review that already to make sure that we get on the front foot. The issue is that, in the end, the implementation of DORA is really in everyone's interest. It's about strengthening the operational resilience of the sector. And so, I think there's a common interest here between the industry and the supervisors. At the same time, clearly there's recognition by the supervisors that, it might require a few tweaks at the end to make sure it's all properly in place.
No, that's already, I think, encouraging. And I think on the objective, there's no disagreement. Maybe one last question on the oversight framework, because of course you can't take any final decisions on individual companies, whether or not they're designated, but you must have a fair sense from the work you've done so far by companies coming to you or otherwise indicating that there might or might not be significant. Is there any indication of the rough number? Because there's been talk that it was under 20, then it's maybe more, and so on. So nobody really quite knows how far the parameter might be the first time around. Any indication of roughly numbers?
No, I wouldn't want to speculate on the numbers. I think it's difficult to tell. We obviously tried with the dry run exercise to get a bit of a better feel. We also did, I think it was last year, a kind of first survey just to get a bit of an idea, but it's pretty difficult to tell. And don't forget, it's not only those that are actually falling within the definition, it's also the opt-in possibility and so on. So it's actually quite hard to judge how this will pan out. So no, I wouldn't want to speculate on the numbers at this point in time.
No, because I remember I asked you the same question a year ago, and I loved your answer then. You said that if you feel you're significant, most likely you will be. Which was good. I mean, switching to MiCA, because MiCA has also entered into force now. And we're in this interesting period at the moment whereby there's this registration period for existing licenses to be transferred. And there's a lot of uncertainty there as well as to some of the service providers, how they might be designated, or for which services they should apply for their licenses. How do you see the home host corporation in this area and the role of ESMA in helping the industry through that process?
So indeed, MiCA application is also now there. We are in the middle of seeing, the process of authorizations of crypto asset service providers going through. That is obviously a responsibility of the national supervisory authorities, and many of them are very actively in the engagement with the relevant industry players. We are, as ESMA, trying to basically do things. On the one hand, provide where we can the help and support to supervisors through common views on how should the authorization process work, what are the key determinants, how will you look at this in your day-to-day work on the authorizations. And we've just published actually some guidance on that the supervisors are committed to using in each of the countries, which I think is also helpful for the industry. That's why we published it, to really give a bit of indication what people will be looking at. And then on top of that, we basically, behind the scenes, as ESMA, are offering a forum, a possibility, and an open door for national supervisors to come together to share their current cases, their current experiences, and really work together to try to make sure that we have common views on, is this an acceptable level of an application? I'm facing this particular question and issue, how would you deal with that? To try to really ensure that we try to find as common ways of tackling these different authorization cases across the different national competent authorities.
Yeah, I think the supervisor, what was called statement, I think on Friday was actually very helpful in that regard. So maybe moving on to the future agenda, because we're looking really at the agenda for the next 5 years. I think you recently published a very interesting report on decentralized finance, and maybe you would like to say a few words on that.
Yeah, this was joint work actually with the EBA, and it was looking at how does the decentralized finance framework actually look at the moment, how is that developing in the European industry, and also what is happening particularly on crypto lending, borrowing, and staking. And this was more an analytical piece, really, looking at, from the data, the information that we could gather, what this industry currently looks like. What it showed to us was that, a bit like the global picture, this is not yet a very significant part of the financial system. Clearly, it remains very marginal. At the same point, what we also saw that compared to the global picture, while Europe is ahead of the overall global median, it's clear that we are behind some of the countries where this is more developed, US and South Korea maybe being the two best examples there. So I think what we also tried to look at in the report was a bit on, so what are the implications here going forward? On the one hand, for anti-money laundering, fighting of financial crime, the issue of how does it affect actually particularly the crypto lending borrowing and staking, how does it affect consumers on the ground? Are there consumer protection issues that we need to be worried about? And we clearly identified some areas there where we think this is not yet an area where the protections are where they probably should be. We also looked at the financial stability risks, which are, given the size at the moment, pretty small. So that's maybe overall the work that we've done. The report is out there on our respective websites, so feel free to plunge into it.
Yeah, it's interesting that in the UK framework that's being developed, they will include lending and staking as CASP, crypto asset services, and we'll see how that then evolves kind of in the EU-UK context. But IOSCO's also been working on decentralized finance. Maybe Jean-Paul might say something on that later. But how do you see the work at the European level interact with the IOSCO work in this innovative, highly innovative part of this industry?
So I think obviously ESMA is very much engaged in the IOSCO work as well. It's important that we look not only at our European kind of landscape, that we look more broadly and work with our global counterparts to try to ensure that we have a good picture generally how this is developing. I would also say that in a way what we tried to do in Europe was a bit of a deep dive on the European picture, because one of the things the IOSCO report very clearly said, we as regulators globally need to have a better understanding of the market and how it's developing, how financial services are integrating some of these new technologies and developments into their day-to-day workings. And so in a way, our report was also trying to meet that for the European side of things. I think other parts of the IOSCO report were also very valuable. They were about, let's make sure if we look at regulation that is looking across whatever way the technology that is being used is, whatever technology is behind it. So I think there are a lot of commonalities really between the overall IOSCO picture and what we're trying to do in Europe.
Yeah, no, I expected nothing less, but I think given its decentralized finance, it jumps over borders maybe more than some of the others. And a big theme of today was technology is kind of border neutral. And so, yeah.
No, and I think you see that already very much in the crypto asset space, and now trying to implement MiCA. That's one of our key issues, is how do we actually have a European framework that works for the European players, but that also ensures that there's a level playing field in Europe, and that not players from outside of Europe are undercutting that, which is why, for example, we issued some guidance on the remote solicitation and all these kind of things, because we really need to make sure that that system works also in the wider global picture.
Yeah, and it'd be very interesting once implemented to see how it will work in reality. Which brings me to one last question, which the Commissioner also already mentioned, that within months the Commission will publish a first evaluation report on decentralized finance and NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Without preempting what the Commission will do, but what would be your expectations? What would you like to see out of such a report?
So first of all, I should say the reason we did the DeFi report together with the EBA was to feed into that Commission work. So hopefully you will recognize some things when the Commission comes out. And I think from my perspective, what would be useful from the Commission is to really do a proper stock take of where are we currently, where is the industry taking us when we look at these type of DeFi developments and so on. And how does that interact with the existing requirements that are now coming with MiCA? What are the boundaries? Is that still correct? Also looking at what are the further opportunities in the European scheme for tokenization. I think obviously the ECB is already doing some work on that on the payments side. I think we are looking at it when we look at the DLT pilots, for example, what is actually coming through as examples there. And I think, therefore, that is one of the areas where it would be useful to really take a step back and look at, are we at the right, do we have the right approach at the moment and the right balance between encouraging the innovation, but at the same time making sure that we have the right regulatory framework around it?
Yeah, it's interesting. You've just led me on to kind of the DLT pilot. How do you see that working at the moment? I've lost track. I think 4 schemes have been, or 4 pilots have been approved, or is it 4? 2. Oh, well, I was a bit too optimistic. So, but there's a few more in the pipeline.
Yeah.
So how do you see this so far? There's been talk, again, the UK is going for bigger, higher thresholds, or actually is going for a more flexible application of thresholds. How do you see the pilots working so far?
So the regime obviously got off to a relatively slow start. I think we have to be clear about that. With, as I said, 2 authorized DLT market infrastructures in the EU so far. One by an established player, so the CSD in Prague, and the other one by a slightly more newer player, 21X in Germany, which is actually interesting because it also makes a hybrid between trading and settlement. So, and what we have seen is that there are indeed a number of additional pilot projects in the pipeline. I was told, I just asked yesterday, so it's about 14 that are in the pipeline. So we are seeing clearly things coming forward. We also see a high degree of diversity of what type of proposals are coming forward between both public permissionless blockchains and private permission blockchains, and also only trading, only settlement, or both. So from our perspective, it's also good that the Commission has clarified that there's not necessarily an end date to this, which I think will encourage more people now to go for it. I think the difference with the UK regime is also that the EU regime is very broad, so it is permissioned and permissionless and so on. So I think it has a slightly different scope. It has, I think, still legs to go, and I would look forward to seeing what else will come out of it. I think overall we need to see also how it connects with the, as I said, the payments part of it going forward. So there's certainly more that we need to see coming through, and I'm hopeful that it's a good testing ground, really, the DLT pilot, to pursue that.
Yes, I think we will have some announcements from the ECB this month and then in May on the cash lag, because I agree with you, that seems to be one of the barriers to the adoption of some of these pilots so far.
And then I think we also need to have a look at European level on the level of harmonization that needs to lie behind that if you want to tokenize some of the existing financial instruments. Because at the moment we are still stuck in that rather fragmented post-trade infrastructure, company law, securities law type things that we are having a problem with in our existing traditional financial system, but clearly we are also seeing that as a barrier sometimes for the extension of the tokenization.
Yeah, because that was actually one of my last points, which is tokenization, an issue that the Commissioner highlighted as a big priority for the next few years. And I see huge potential there, but you're right. Even today, we don't recognize, let's say, digital documents. We recognize digital signatures, but not necessarily digital documents. So God help us recognizing tokenized securities. But what would you like to see from the EU institutions in this area of tokenization over the next few years?
So, as I said earlier, I think it's an area we need to continue to explore. We need to see what is feasible, but at the same time, we also need to be conscious that we have the right regulatory framework around it. We need to make sure that we properly consider what are the potential also risks associated with it. But I do see a lot of prospect that could bring greater efficiencies in this area, and that could in itself make the capital markets in Europe more efficient and more harmonized over time. So that could be a positive driver.
Yeah, I think a lot of the benefit of capital markets union is not necessarily legislation, it's actually using technology to facilitate a more effective market. One last question maybe to you. We spend a lot of time, well, actually most of the time in the morning, on artificial intelligence. And I'd just be interested from an ESMA perspective. I always say you were at the forefront of artificial intelligence because you regulated high-frequency trading when we didn't know what artificial intelligence was really, and also robo-advice. What do you see in the area of securities markets as some of the priorities around artificial intelligence?
So artificial intelligence is definitely something which we see clearly taking off across the whole of the financial services sector. It's something which we, and together with the national competent authorities, are very closely monitoring, and there have been various surveys done. What are the main areas where this is being picked up? A lot of it seems to be still in the efficiency generation type areas in financial services. What we see still a bit less of is the actual use in driving, for example, the whole investment portfolio management process in funds. That is still seems to be less prominent. But it's clear that it's being taken up across the whole of the SRO remit, really. If you look at the investment funds, if you look at investment firms and the interactions with clients, if you look at credit ratings and the support that you can get to the analysis, it's in the securities trading in terms of making sure that algorithmic trading becomes even more efficient. It's really everywhere, and so it's a big topic for us. And then on top of what's actually happening in the industry and understanding how far this is going, it's also about how can we as supervisors actually use artificial intelligence in our own work to ensure that we can also be at the forefront of supervising the entities as they move forward in that direction. And there are clearly issues around concentration, model dependency, and various other things that we watch very carefully.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope you have the resources to follow up on this one, because that will be tough as supervisors. But as always, Verena, thank you so much for making the time, giving us an insight, and all the best tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.